You are listening to episode number 77 of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. In today's episode, we talk with Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and George, KJ6VU from the Hamradio 360 Workbench podcast. I get some questions answered that I've been wanting to ask for a little bit about a previous episode of theirs. We talk a little bit about what's going on over on the 360 Workbench podcast, and we top it off with their thoughts on how Hamvention went this year. So stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. This is episode number 77. Today we are kicking it with a couple of the guys from the Hamradio 360 podcast, George, KJ6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. They are the hosts of the Workbench podcast over on Hamradio 360. I get some answers to some questions that I've had since one of their previous episodes, back episode number 15 if I'm not mistaken, where they talked about some data radios and some like really small data radios that I've been thinking about using for some projects here locally around the farm, or around the ranch rather. And so anyways, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about some of the stuff that's going on over on the Workbench podcast and some upcoming stuff that they have and what's going on over there. And I get to ask the question that I've been wanting to ask for quite some time. You'll have to listen to the second segment of this to find out what that question is. And last but not least, I talked to them about how they did and what they thought about Hamvention this last year. So stick around for the interview here in just a little bit, and I hope that y'all enjoy it as much as I did talking with them. But first off, there's going to be a lot of information, a lot of the links that we're going to be talking about in the show notes of today's episode. So make sure y'all head on over there and check those out if you have any interest at all in the stuff that we're talking about. You can find the show notes at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/77. That's the number 77. You can find me on Facebook. The group is at facebook.com/groups/everythinghamradio. The page is at facebook.com/everythinghamradio. I am on YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio. And last but not least, I'm on Twitter at K5CLM. I'm also on Instagram and Pinterest and all that other stuff, but I'm not really active a whole lot on that, but you can find links to those on the website at everythinghamradio.com. Up on the top, there's a menu option that says social. Just click on there and it'll take you to all my social media pages. So I don't have a whole lot that I'm going to talk about here before, so let's go ahead and jump right into the interview and hear what George and Jeremy have to say. Hey guys, we are here today with George, KJ6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. Now, you might recognize these guys from the Hamradio 360 Workbench podcast. They have agreed to come on to my show and talk to us a little bit. So, Jeremy, George, thank you very much for coming on.
Hey, Curtis. Well, thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so, first thing I wanted to talk about, I heard a few episodes ago where y'all were talking about some type of small, like, digital radio transmitter things that you could use for, like, repeaters and household sensors and stuff like that. I would really love to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So you're talking about the show we did a few episodes ago about building a remote radio site monitoring and control thing. Does that sound right?
Yeah. You know, it really amazed me when I was listening to this. It's like, okay, this sounds really neat, and there's so much. My mind just got racing on what all can be done with this. Using it for, temperature sensors or something like that in your house and stuff like that. So, can you tell us a little bit about the radios that you were talking about on that episode, and maybe give some uses for them and how people will do it?
Yeah, sure. So we were talking about using these little low-power data radios that are typically 2.4 gigahertz radios, sometimes 900 megahertz radios. And to do something like that, you really need a couple of parts. You need the radio itself, and then you also need to have a microcontroller of some kind to do the actual processing to, let's say, read a sensor and then tell the radio to transmit that signal to another radio and then take that data and then do something with it. So all of this base technology is very common now in the do-it-yourself maker kind of world. So the world of Arduino microcontrollers and Raspberry Pis and other devices like that, coupled with these little data radios. And the data radios come in different price points and different sets of functionality, depending on how fancy and how long range and what kind of error correction and so forth that you want to use. But the basic idea is, let's say you have a temperature sensor. You want to monitor maybe your indoor temperature or the temperature of your power amplifier or something. That hooks up to a microcontroller. The microcontroller reads the data periodically and then tells the data radio to transmit that number, that value of the sensor. At the other end, a similar radio receives it, and then you can do something with that data. For instance, you can have a little LCD display that just displays the temperature, or perhaps you can plug that microcontroller into a PC and log that data on the PC or display the data on the PC, or whatever you want to do with it. So that's kind of the basic idea. We can kind of double-click on those parts and talk a bit more detail, but that's the basic idea.
Well, I tell you what, I'd love to have a temperature sensor in this room right now, because I tell you what, it is hot. In Texas, it's like
it's pretty hot out.
It was like 95, 97 degrees today, something like that, and like 105 felt like temperature. Me sitting in this metal room, it's a little toasty.
Well, it's like that in California. Believe it or not, we hit 100 here in the Bay Area, and right now it's about 93, so it's pretty toasty out here too.
Yeah, but we had some severe storms roll through here earlier this evening, and so much like our field day weather tomorrow, we are looking at a high of 79 with zero humidity and all sunshine.
Hang up on Jeremy, will you? So, I see so many uses for this, and even just for the general. Just the general person, not talking about, the ham a repeater owner or something like that, but, like, for example, saying, I want to know what the temperature and humidity is outside, and have some kind of weather display or something like that inside. What all do you think it would take to do something like this, to have just like a basic weather station, if you will, on the DIY type thing?
Okay, so in that case, would you have, let's say, the sensor far away from the display, so you want to transmit that data over the radio?
Yeah, like say, I have a computer in my house, and I want to know what the inside temperature is, say upstairs and downstairs, and say the outside temperature and humidity, maybe wind speed, barometric pressure, all that good stuff. Okay,
well, first of all, solving that problem could be done many, many, many different ways. And if you talk to 5 different people, they'll probably give you 6 different suggestions of how to do it. And the reason I say it that way is that when you start to break apart the pieces that you need, there are many, many, many choices that do the same thing. So, for example, let's say the external device, as I mentioned before, has like three parts to it: a sensor, a microcontroller, and the radio, plus a power source like a battery or a power supply or a solar panel. So let's say 4 parts. So the first thing is, well, what kind of sensor would you use? And there are many different manufacturers of temperature sensors. Some are temperature only. Some are temperature and humidity. Some are encapsulated in, let's say, a metal jacket, so you can put it into a harsh environment. And some are just a exposed sensor that you wouldn't want to get wet. So there's a lot of different sources for them. So some of the more popular sensors, like the temperature sensor that's super popular, is called a 18B20. This is made by a company called Maxim Semiconductor. And you could buy those parts for about $2 or $3. And it's a little chip. It actually looks like a transistor. And that thing will read the temperature, and then it will transmit the value of the temperature out through one of the pins in a stream of bits. So it's actually a digital sensor. Now, there's other analog sensors, thermocouples, there's other semiconductor sensors that'll do the same thing in a different way. So that's the first thing to pick. The second thing you want to pick is the processor that's going to read that information and then turn it into a number. A digital temperature sensor needs a microcontroller that'll read that series of bits coming off the chip. In the case of an analog sensor, you need an analog to digital converter that's a little part of the microcontroller. They all do that. And the software will read one of those inputs and then convert that into a number, the temperature. So for the processor, again, there's lots and lots of choices. You could use an Arduino, you could use a Raspberry Pi, you could use any one of a number of other microcontrollers or little Linux boards to accomplish that.
But since we are talking to George and Jeremy here, it's going to be our Arduino that we use, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, and it turns out I personally have done lots and lots of projects like this over the years, mostly with a different kind of processor called a PIC. And a PIC is equivalent to an Arduino, but it's by a different manufacturer. And today, the Arduino has really become the most popular in the do-it-yourself and kind of hobbyist world. So I would go that route because there's just so many examples of code and hardware out there. If you just Google Arduino temperature sensor, you will find hundreds of projects that have already been designed and built and tested by somebody, and you could literally just reproduce their circuit and take their code and put it into that processor, and most of the work is done for you. So that's pretty straightforward.
So can you have like multiple sensors going into the same controller board, or do you need a controller board per sensor?
That's a great question. You can have multiple sensors. So every microcontroller or microcontroller board has multiple inputs, and some of them have a few and some have many. It just depends on whichever chips you pick. So you pick the chip based on how many I/O pins you need. So yeah, let's say in the case of a temperature sensor, if you need 3 or 4 or 5, that's really no problem. In fact, the typical Arduino has about 15 or 16 I/O pins. And some of those are digital and some of those are analog, and some can be data, some can be just bits like a on or off. So that's over a dozen interface signals. The typical application, usually you can get away with even those simplest Arduinos because let's say like you're doing a temperature-controlled fan. A friend of mine built one for his amplifier. He had 3 temperature sensors and a fan control output. That's only 4 pins. And you have a whole temperature controller for your, in his case, his amplifier. So if you wanted to do 50 sensors, then you need a bigger chip. But boards exist for handling more and more sensors like that. So just about anything you could think of, you could figure out a way to make it.
Okay.
Now, the other thing you could do, by the way, is back to the radio idea. You could say, well, I want 5 sensors, but they're in 5 different rooms. So you have a choice. You could either run wires to all these rooms, which is kind of a cumbersome thing to do, or you can make 5 little standalone sensors with their own little radio that transmits that information back to a hub. So all 5 of those sensors could be transmitting their data at different times, and a central collection point receives all those numbers and then puts them all together and presents you all of the data in one spot.
Now, I'm assuming these radios are not, like a massive size thing. They're relatively small, though, right?
That's right. So the core of the radio is probably a single chip. But when you go buy these radios, you really don't want to just get the raw chip. You want to get a little module, a little tiny circuit board that's got the chip and whatever supporting components that go with it, like capacitors, resistors, voltage regulator, antenna connector. And those little data radios are typically about an inch on the side, maybe a little bit bigger. There's a particular footprint of those that's super common called an XBEE. And that was a footprint that was originally defined by a company called Digi International. And they make a whole variety of radios that fit that footprint. They make radios that use a protocol called Zigbee, which is very common in building automation systems. They make Wi-Fi radios in that footprint. They make cellular modems in that footprint. So there's a lot of different kinds of data radios you can put in that little 20-pin, 1-inch square circuit board footprint. So the cool thing, by the way, about that is if you design with that in mind, maybe one project uses these Zigbee radios that allow you to make your own private little point-to-point data network. Or maybe you have another unit you want to build and put it in a remote location far away from your base station, far away from the house, but that has cellular coverage, and you might put a cellular modem board in that. And what's really cool is in the past, if you wanted to do that, the cellular modem was a really big thing that sucked a lot of power. And today you can get a cellular modem for about $100, and the monthly rate for the data for let's say a megabyte of data is like less than $5. So let's say you on your property, maybe quite a ways from the house, you might have a pump, or you might have a water tank, or a gate that you want to monitor. And if you can't get to it directly by radio, then you could use the cell network.
Wow. I could actually maybe use that to control my front gate or something for a switch to open it or something, since it's half a mile away or so.
So actually, the funny thing is, line of sight, even the not cellular radios, the ones that use the Zigbee protocol, or what I use a lot, which is the DigiMesh equivalent. That's Digi's proprietary version of Zigbee, if you will. Those little radios at 2.4 gigs, the high power radio runs about 63 milliwatts, and with a modest antenna and line of sight, I've been able to go over half a mile with no obstructions between them and be able to talk from one device to another. So something like let's say on your property, if there's no buildings or other obstructions, if you can see from the house to the gate, but it's just a half mile away, you might be close enough to actually remotely control it, or your water tank, or your pump, or whatever. Now, by the way, what's very cool about these radios is you could use them in a very complicated way or in a very simple way. The simple way to use them is the radio has a UART. It has a serial port on it. So, like on your computer, if you have a dumb terminal and you type on it and the ASCII characters go out the serial port, that's kind of a serial port. And you can configure these radios so that when they power on, they find each other, they see each other automatically, and any characters that go into one of the radios pops out the other radio as if it were a wire. So the radios can be really simply configured. So you can make a network of devices, and it's like one big party line. So it's actually not that hard to figure out how to make these things work and build your own little private network.
So what would you have to use for an antenna? Would you use a Yagi, or is it basically built into the chip?
Of course, it depends on the distance, and they make these modules in multiple versions. So one version has an antenna that's printed on the circuit board, or it's a little chip antenna on the board. Another version has a quarter wave whip, which is hilarious. It's a 1-inch piece of wire soldered to the board that just sticks up. Another option is an SMA connector, and another option is what's called a UFL connector. That's a little snap-on. If you pull your PC apart, the Wi-Fi radio or the Bluetooth radio usually has a little tiny coax cable going to it with this itty-bitty connector that presses on. That's called a U.FL connector. So they make boards with all of those. So it just depends on how far you have to go. So if you want to go from one side of the house to the other, that little quarter wave wire antenna is probably sufficient. But if you want to go half a mile away, you might want to have an antenna with some gain. So you might need a real connector with a little piece of coax to a real antenna. And the real antenna could be a Yagi or a dipole or a ground plane. It just depends on the distance and what kind of gain you might need. Now, the trick, of course, at 2.4 gigahertz is you don't want to put the 63 milliwatt radio in the shack, run 100 feet of RG58 coax to the antenna on the roof, because you're going to lose 98% of the energy in the coax. So, you want to think about this a little bit about where you want to put the transmitter and the radio.
So if I wanted to set up one of these things in each room in my house or something to check the temperature or something like that, I really wouldn't have to have any kind of external antenna. It would all be basically chip mounted and would be fine.
Yeah, that's probably fine. Now, as I mentioned, those are radios that I use a bunch. The high power, quote unquote, ones are 63 milliwatts. The low power version is 1 milliwatt. And of course, that's about 18 dB less signal. So in that case, you might want to put on an external antenna to pick up a a little bit better signal, or if it's very close, maybe the wire is sufficient. So with just a little quarter wave wire antenna in a normal house, you could probably go 30, 40, 50 feet through walls, and it's no big deal with 1 milliwatt. And if you're trying to get all the way around the house and there's a lot of obstructions and all that, then you might go to the higher power radios. The only difference is the price, really, and the power consumption. So the 1 milliwatt radios are about $19, and the higher powered radios are about $34. Now, those radios are what I would consider the top of the line, most robust, guaranteed to work quality radios. You can actually find much cheaper data radios, especially out of China, for a lot less. And all of the ones I've ever used have been a compromise in some way. They're more finicky to program. They don't have the same quality of error recovery and retransmission in the protocol and all that. So you can get data radios as cheap as $1 or $2, actually. So there's a radio called an NRF. What is it? NRF? Jeremy, you probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's a couple of different ones. I think is it the NRF 69 or 96?
No, it's like the 2401, 24L01, I believe it is. So, yeah, that's it. So hang on to the thought about that other one for a sec. So the NRF 24L01 is a single chip. It's kind of like the thing I just described, but it's super cheap. They're like $2 to $5 for a little circuit board. I've played with them a bit, and they're a little bit more finicky. So sometimes it takes more software coding experience to get them to work reliably. But a lot of guys have done it. The one you're talking about, I think that one is a fairly simple transmitter receiver without any error correction.
Are you talking about the NRF 52832?
No, I don't know what that one is.
That's a $20. That's a $20 option from Nordic.
Oh, okay, yeah. So all these NRF chips are all from Nordic Semi, which specializes in this sort of thing. So, like if you search Arduino NRF 24L01, then you'll find a zillion reference designs with an Arduino processor in that data radio, and then hooking up the Arduino to your switch, your relay, your sensor is pretty simple. So I think that kind of in the big picture, Curtis, if you're going to go build something like you're describing, other people have done it many, many times over. So that's the good news. You can go out and find examples. You could find the hardware pretty cheap, really, surprisingly cheap. And what it would really take to make it work is getting familiar with the software. And if you use someone else's project exactly as they've developed it, it'll probably just work. If you want to kind of go off the rails and write your own program or modify someone's, then you could absolutely do it, but it's going to take more time to really kind of immerse yourself in the code and understand how it works and all that, which is totally doable. I don't mean for it to sound like it's that hard, but it would take more time than just slap it together.
Yeah, I see so many possibilities with stuff like this, even non-ham related, but it's somewhat over my head, I will admit that, but I think it's very interesting and definitely something that I'm going to look into, especially with opening my front gate, because the little clicker thing does not work for my house.
Well, you could do some really cool stuff. Like you could have it set up so you could talk to the front gate to open it up with like a solenoid, and you could also put a switch closure on the gate, so if someone opens it, it then sends the message back to you. And you could even do something like at your base station in the house, if it sees that someone's opened the gate, if you hook it up to something like a Raspberry Pi, it could be plugged into your router, and it could send you an SMS text message. So you could be at work and get a text message that says, someone just opened up the front gate. Now, you can go buy products that do this for sure, and they're not that expensive. But if you want the fun of doing it yourself, this is absolutely doable.
Yeah, I was going to say, where's the fun in that? Now, can you
exactly.
Can you hook up a video, like a little video camera or something like that, and use these radios?
So with all of these little low-power data radios run the data at a fairly low speed. When I say low speed, typically these things run anywhere from about 9600 baud up to 250 kilobaud. So that's more than adequate to send data, like text data. But if you're going to stream video, this is really not at all adequate for that. So if you're going to do video, you really need an IP connection. So you really need to run Wi-Fi. Now that's another option too. You could do something like that. For instance, there's at the low end of the price range now, there's a Raspberry Pi Zero that Jeremy and I talked about. So the Raspberry Pi Zero with Wi-Fi is $10, and they make a camera that plugs into it. And I think the camera, I'm not sure if you know, Jeremy, I think like $20 or $30.
I think they're 30, and then on top of that, the Pi Foundation makes an actual official case now for like another $5 or $7 that actually allows you to mount a camera, a Raspberry Pi Zero W, all in one unit, and you're pretty much good to go.
So for what, $40, $50, you could make your own video camera. Now you could say, well, hang on, I could go to Amazon and spend $65 and get a commercial off-the-shelf, ready to go
for
IP
30.
camera.
You can do it for even cheaper.
So the funny thing is, like, some of these products are so cheap, if you just want it done, you could go buy it. But like you said, Curtis, what's the fun in that?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe your application is slightly different or slightly more complicated, or you just want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So, by the way, reeling back a little bit about how do you get into this? When you first look at this stuff, it seems very overwhelming because you don't really. If you're not in this world professionally, you look at it and think, oh my God, there's like a lot to learn. You got to learn all these parts and all these terminology I don't understand, and I don't even know where to begin. The really good thing is that there's a ton of tutorials and there's a ton of guides out there to start to learn how to program. The first thing I would do is I'd go buy an Arduino board, and maybe you have some junk box parts, or you get one of the kits that have extra parts, and you just build a few little projects. Like, Jeremy, what's the thing what's the first thing that everybody builds?
A blinker?
A blinker, yeah. It's like the hello world of microcontrollers is hook up an LED, put on the power, and it blinks on and off. But if you could get to that point, what you've done is you've proved that you can hook something up, you could write some code, and you could get it to transfer that code down into the part and program it. And once you learn those steps, that's all you need to know besides making your project more complicated, with more parts and more code. You've got the basics. And you can learn those basics in an evening. I mean, it's really not that hard.
Well, it sounds like I have a lot of studying and learning and planning to do, because this sounds like a perfect little thing for me, on especially my little gate issue.
Well, actually, I've got a big junk box of parts. So if you want to try this out, I could send you a box of parts, and you just need to get yourself an Arduino board, and I could give you all the extra, junk box parts to build all kinds of little stuff.
I might take you up on that. Well, guys, let's take a quick break here. My brain's kind of fried here about all these little data radio things and ideas and all that going through my head. So let's take a quick break. I'm going to turn on my AC and cool down a little bit. When we come back, we're going to talk with George and Jeremy about what's been going on over on their Workbench podcast. So stick around. We'll be right back. Do you have an old-fashioned voltage or amp meter hooked to your station? Are you looking to find something that has more bells and whistles? Check out the West Mountain Radio Power Check. The Power Check has 8 display modes, including voltage, current flow in either direction, wattage, and amp hours, and will measure from 0 to 60 volts with 40 amps continuous load. It is accurate to within 10 millivolts and 10 milliamps. It has a backlit graphics LCD that will display data in digital, analog, and bar graph formats. You can even monitor your battery backup with a programmable gas gauge. The non-volatile memory stores more than 100,000 data points without power. That's nearly 2.5 months worth of data at 1 point per minute. It has a USB computer interface for configuration and data download, and you can program it to sound an alarm for overcurrent, over and under voltage, and amp hours. The software that comes with it allows you to program every aspect of the power check operation, such as data logging rate, display formats, and alarm conditions. You can display current, voltage, wattage, and amp hours in real time. It has an integrated charting software that automatically collects and displays data. All the data can be downloaded and stored for later analysis. If this sounds like something you would really like, make sure you head on over to everythinghamradio.com/WMR and check it out. And if you do, and enter the code EHSummer at checkout, you will get $50 off of your purchase. Normally the power check runs $184.95. If you enter the coupon code EHSummer, you get a $50 discount, and that comes to $134.95. You can't beat it. The offer expires September 30th, 2017, so make sure you head on over and get yours before the coupon expires. Also, don't forget to pick up your free USB port monitor with your purchase. Again, that's everythinghamradio.com/WMR for more information. All right, y'all, we are back with George, KJ6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. And like I said, you will remember them from the Hamradio 360 Workbench podcast. And I'm actually going to say something that I've really been wanting to say for a very, very long time. Something that y'all say every week. So, George, Jeremy, what's on your Workbench podcast now?
That's a great question, Curtis. Did you say trademark Hamradio 360? You said that. Jeremy, you want to go first?
So, boy, what's on my Workbench? Curtis, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I actually just listened to your SDR show this morning. For folks who do listen to the Workbench, I spent a long time talking about Windows tablets, and so I actually just ordered a full-blown AirSpy R2 from airspy.us, and I received it today. I've had a mini since they first came out, have loved it. Gives you 6 megahertz of bandwidth, 4.8 with the aliasing cut off on the edges. This one gives you 10 megahertz of bandwidth, which is awesome. But unfortunately, my really awesome tablet that I love, the audio stutters when you try to decode FM on the full bandwidth, and so that kind of stinks. So I've been spending all evening prior to this trying to figure out how I could get that working.
When you say full bandwidth, you mean just wide FM channel, a single channel, or you mean like when you're looking at the whole spectrum?
When you're looking at the full 10 megahertz of bandwidth. So, I mean, the AirSpy R2 has two options. One is 10 megahertz of bandwidth, which is its native mode. 8 of that is usable because the outer megahertz on either side is in the aliasing zone. Which you can still have access to if you want, but SDR Sharp automatically is set to keep the aliased parts out. And then it also has a 2.5 megahertz bandwidth option, which that works fine, but the AirSpy Mini gives you 6 and 3. So yeah, I'm still playing around with it to see if there are any other optimizations I can do, but that made me a little sad because I've been really excited about this thing coming all week. I also picked up a low noise amplifier that gives about 20 dB of gain from 100 megahertz to 4 gigahertz, just to kind of help pick up some weak signals. And I'm running all of this off of a Diamond D220 discone, which is like a little tiny baby discone that's really cute and very portable, as opposed to a full-size discone, which is just something that's bound to put people's eyes out.
So cute versus ugly, that's what we go for now.
Well, and yeah, portable, functional. Versus like the full-size Diamond discone, it's something like 100 megahertz to 3 gigahertz. It does a good job. Actually, I discovered a new repeater that I can hit from my house today in 440 as long as I'm on the second floor.
So, George, what's on your Workbench?
Oh, man, I've got so much stuff on my Workbench. I'm really falling behind. Official projects on the Workbench, I have a QRP Labs Whisper transmitter in the cardboard box. I've been dying to build that thing. The goal was to get that done by field day because I want it to be beaconing on, let's say, 15 and see where we could be heard. But that never made it to getting built.
Well,
so that
you didn't say what year. You just said by field day.
Year.
You've got 360 days.
Yeah.
You work in the corporate world, I can tell.
I do.
Let me specify by 2018. So good point. So the second thing is I have a BitX40. So Curtis, we got a big build project group activity going on where we're trying to get people to build the BitX40. And by build, I mean wire up the last 6 wires to it. But even my BitX40 is still sitting in a box. I haven't gotten to it yet. And after field day, I've been thinking about building a field day Go box and trying to bend Jeremy's ear about some ideas of what we might do there and get some other ideas from other folks. I'm never really happy with how I build portable stations, whether they're in a case where you open the top like a Pelican case or in a rack mount case, and I don't want to build anything too big, so I keep going in a big circle about this is the best way to do that. And the last thing I get going here, I'm staring at right now, a friend of mine is on vacation for 2 weeks, and he loaned me his 7300. So I'm playing with that and changing some of the display parameters and fiddling around with it to see what it's like. And so far, I'm liking this radio too much. It's a very sweet radio, but he'll be back in a week and a half, so it's going to go back to the rightful owner. But it's fun to play with it.
On one hand, I would say I really want to have friends like that would loan me their multi-$100 radio to play with for 2 weeks while they're on vacation. But then on the other hand, I don't think I do, because then I would fall in love with it and I'd have to talk my wife into spending that money, and that probably wouldn't go over very well.
It's not a healthy situation.
No, it's not.
But this is really slick. I'm really liking it. You could absolutely see where this user interface is the direction of mainstream ham radio. What I mean by that is I remember when I was first licensed, a brand new fancy schmancy radio had just a mechanical display for the frequency. Then it was a big deal when you can get a digital display to tell you what the frequency is. And so now with radios like the 7300, with the normal user interface like a conventional radio with knobs and buttons, but it's got the waterfall and the frequency spectral display, and being a touchscreen, although I can kind of take or leave the touchscreen part of it, but the display is mesmerizing. You don't have to listen. You just watch the signals bouncing around in the band. It's like Jeremy's SDR. It's just fascinating. So it's pretty clear this is the direction radios are going to go. It's just we're just seeing the beginning of it.
Yeah, there's just something about the older style radios. So my first HF radio that I talked on was an old Swan radio. It had the physical dial and the set frequency range or whatever with the dial. There's just something about that. Of course, the one that I have now is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 segment or 7 segment LCD, LED, whatever those things are that have it, and it's a digital display, but it still has the old, the old feel to it. Of course, I don't know if it works or not right now, but we're getting there. So, question for you: the BitX40 that y'all are making, do they have a 20 meter module for it, or can you get it like a BitX20?
I think the radio off the shelf, the way it comes, is specifically for 40 meters, but I think it's pretty hackable for any band. I don't know how many components you have to change, or if there's a convenient way to jump her out to a little daughter board with other caps and crystals or whatever is necessary. Do you know, Jeremy?
So I know that the group. So yeah, I'm sorry. Let me start over. The group for this online is actually called BitX20. So I think there was a time when there was a BitX20. Now there's a BitX40. And Smitty shared with us that it is just a few modifications to put it on a different band.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. So I don't think it's very hard to change it. But at this point, actually, in the sunspot cycle, 20 would be good. But in a way, 40 is maybe better because we're going to have better propagation on the lower frequency bands. in general, because like 10 and 15 are going to be kind of crummy, 20 in the middle. So I think there'll be more activity on 40. So at this point, it's probably not a bad band. So you just need to figure out how to stretch a bigger wire.
Yeah. Or get an antenna tuner and get your other pack antenna that will do 40.
Hey, there you go.
One or the other. But 20 is what I got right now, so 20 is what I got to work with. So maybe I will work on the BitX40 with the 20 meter hackability or hack a module or hack a something or other, and work along with you. That sounds like fun if I can figure out where to do it at.
Well, what's really cool about this BitX, one reason that Jeremy and I got all excited about doing it is two things, I think. One is it's $60. I mean, it's a whole radio for $60. So that's pretty appealing.
And it's single sideband, too.
And it's single sideband. So that's one. The second thing is, as a kit, quote-unquote, the components are all soldered to the circuit board. So the actual guts of the radio is done. You get it as a fully assembled board. The only thing you really have to wire up are the external controls. So the antenna connector and the volume control and stuff like that. So there's a handful of parts that have to be wired off the board to those components and then mounted in a box of your choosing. So all that stuff, anybody could do that, but you still get the pleasure of doing some building, and because you have to get your hands all over the radio to assemble this, you're going to be forced to actually see the guts and then wonder, well, what's in there, and why does it do what it does, and maybe really look at the manual in more detail. So I think you learn a bit along the way. So it's just like a real winner.
Yeah, and laid out really nicely too, from what y'all were talking about in that last episode where y'all were talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. So what Curtis is referring to is that the sequence of components laid out on the circuit board largely follows the block diagram of the circuit. So it's not just a big jumble of parts. You actually can see that there's different sections of components that do different functions in the radio. So it's good from an educational point of view, too.
Yeah. And I will have links to that episode as well as some of the others that we're talking about today in the show notes of today's episode, so make sure y'all check those out. Or just head on over to the Hamradio360.com website and click on the little Workbench button up at the top menu, and you'll see all of them. Or just simply subscribe on iTunes or something like that. So what else do y'all have going on over there?
Oh, boy. Well, we've got a lot of new interviews coming up. We have, on our next show, we're going to have Brian W6BY, who's a microwave enthusiast. So we're talking here about the BitX40, 40-meter single sideband, kind of traditional ham radio. And Brian's going to go at the other end of the spectrum, literally, where he's going to come on and talk about microwave radios and what are they, and can a normal person actually build a microwave radio, and if you did, what would you even do with it? What kind of activities are out there? So we've got some really cool guests like that coming up, and we'll be talking a bit more about test equipment. We're going to do some talk a little bit about solar panels and portable power, all kinds of other stuff.
Definitely recommend that y'all head over there and listen to the Workbench show. Sometimes it's way over my head. Sometimes I'm driving down the road listening to it to and from work for 2 days and trying to figure it out. But overall, I still listen to it. I mean, y'all are great. They always say that a lot of times the podcast, people listen to the podcast because of the host, not necessarily the content, even though the content still needs to be good. And a lot of times, on some of the episodes that I've listened to, you go way over my head, but I still listen. And it's because of the way that y'all do it and the way that y'all talk about it and just the overall experience of it. So hats off to y'all on that. I'm sure there's
thank you.
Maybe other people that feel the same way as I do, but y'all do a great job. Y'all really do.
I think from the beginning we were trying to figure out what's the right tone we want to set, and our goals, amongst perhaps others, are to get people to build stuff and get people to understand more about the technology. And I think part of what we try to do is not talk down the technology. So if you are familiar with the stuff we're talking about, you could track right along with it. But if it's not something you're familiar with, what we're really hoping for is you'll think, well, I have no idea what that guy just said, but it seems like an interesting topic, or it seems like an interesting application, and maybe I should go read up on it, or maybe I should go look at a project on YouTube that is that and see if it's for me. And, like the thing I love about ham radio is there are so many things that you can do, and so many things that I don't know, even though I've been a ham for a long time. And I'm constantly learning stuff. And so I totally get the idea of, man, I have no idea what you just said, but it sounds interesting. That happens to me all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So it's always something new to go dig into.
To kind of plus one on that, one of the best examples, and I know we've had listeners mention this to us before, is there's another podcast, an amateur radio podcast called Solder Smoke, and this is one that George had recommended, and it can be fairly deep and technical. But when I first started listening to it, one of the guys, Pete, do you remember Pete's call sign?
Pete Giuliano. I can't recall his call though.
Yeah, he's in the QRP Hall of Fame, but he was in the process of building a transceiver that was Arduino controlled, using one of the analog devices. Was the 9860, the 9820?
I think so.
It's basically the same synthesizer that we use in the Workbench antenna analyzer kit that we had, and he was explaining all these components, and I didn't know anything he was talking. I understood the Arduino parts, but I learned enough to go start Googling, and it got me really excited that here was a person who was actually building a radio from scratch using off-the-shelf components that were very accessible, very well documented, and it made me, for the first time since I've been a ham, feel like, if I wanted to go build my own HF transceiver, I could. And so even if you're not familiar with what some of these things are, like listening, getting the context, kind of understanding how these pieces come together is really important. And again, Google is your friend.
I think half the battle is getting over your own, I don't want to say your own fear of learning it, but your own hesitation because you're afraid you're not going to understand it. And I think when you listen to other guys talk about it in a way that makes it seem approachable, then you're more willing to give it a try. So I think that Solder Smoke's a great example because both Bill and Pete talk about the guts of the circuitry at a component level and can talk for like an hour about the mixer. I'm not that interested in that at that level, but when I'm done listening to the show, what I think is, well, those guys are building radios from scratch and then operating QRP, making some contacts. You know what? I'm not going to do what they did exactly, but I might go get a kit. I might assemble it. I might not go to the depth that they go to, but, I might dabble in that area. Or I may not build a kit to do that, but I might go buy a radio to do that. So it's not always the exact thing that they're talking about, or maybe that we're talking about. But if it gets somebody off dead center and motivates them to go build something, or motivates them to learn something, or motivates them to just have fun in ham radio, then like mission accomplished. We don't really need for people to do exactly what we're doing. In fact, if they do, great, and if they don't, that's fine too. But be active and learn stuff.
Right, absolutely.
That's really kind of the idea.
Since I started this podcast, and since I started my blog, 2.5 years ago or whatever now it is, I've learned so much, and especially with this podcast and having knowledgeable people like y'all come on and teach me stuff and teach my listeners stuff. It's a never-ending thing, and I've been a ham now since 1995, I believe. And there's some stuff out there that I had no idea there was. I had no idea there was these little radios like we talked about in the last segment and ways to do it. And like, a couple episodes ago when I talked to the guy that you introduced me to with RC, some of the stuff that he talked about and, the software-defined radios last episode, I had no idea that they were there. But I learned so much every episode and every blog post that I write, and that's the beauty of what this hobby is all about. If you're not learning something, you're not doing something right.
Yeah, that's you're not paying attention, that's for sure, because there is so much. And just to wax philosophical one more time, I think that the nature of the hobby is a very giving hobby, and maybe it was Cale said early on when we were talking about stuff, and I think he said I'm interested in woodworking, but no one ever gave me a table saw. I'm interested in photography, but no one ever gave me a camera. I expressed a vague interest in ham radio, and people are willing to give me a radio. And when you stop and think about it for a minute, like, well, that rings pretty true. I mean, it's a very giving hobby. It's a very welcoming hobby. And, I look at who some of my very best friends are, and they, they're ham radio guys. Maybe that I just hang out with ham radio guys, but I've made a lot of great friendships over the years. So, it's really a wonderful hobby in so many ways.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, like you said, I've been working with woodworking now for about as long as as my wife has allowed me to, and I'm still getting new things. That's my Christmas present every year is some new woodworking tool. And with ham radio, it's like you said, it's not somebody's not going to go and give you something in another hobby. Somebody's not going to come over per se and do something with you. Like when I was moving, I had two hams that said, sure, no problem, I'll come over and help you take down your tower. I had a 65-foot tower in my backyard, and two local hams came over and took it down for me. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I didn't want to climb the thing, but I needed it down. And they, took a Sunday and went over there and took it down for me in an hour or so. So wow. This hobby, like you said, is very giving, very, I don't know, very, very something. But, yeah. So, I'm sure that if any of y'all have listened to the Ham Radio 360 podcast, you'll know that this segment of it started last year at Hamvention. And now we've had another Hamvention under our belt. Next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about what their experience was at Hamvention. So let's, I guess, take another quick break, and we'll be back and talk about that. So stick around. Do you need some things to spruce up your ham shack a little bit? Maybe you drink coffee in the morning while you're listening to this podcast and you want a new coffee mug. Or maybe your mouse pad is going bad and it's, all tore up and everything. Or maybe you don't like the little rings that are left on your coffee table after you put a soda down. Well, I can help you with that. Check out my swag store at everythinghamradio.com/store for a whole list of things that I have. I have coffee cups, I have mouse pads in both black and white backgrounds, and I have two different styles of coasters that you can get, as well as a wall clock, a travel mug, and a customized call sign desk plate that I make personally, and I don't have a picture of it yet up on the store, but I am working on it. I will hopefully get it here in the next couple weeks or so. But if any of this sounds like something that you might want to put in your ham shack, definitely head on over to everythinghamradio.com/store and check those out. Reasonably priced, great products. I have them here in my recording studio as we speak. My mouse is sitting on the mouse pad, my drink is sitting on the coaster. Awesome little things, and please check it out. Again, that website is everythinghamradio.com/store. Alright, y'all, we are back with George and Jeremy from the Ham Radio 360 Workbench Podcast. And like I said last episode, this branch, so to speak, or spin-off of the Ham Radio 360 podcast started with Hamvention. And we have another Hamvention under our belt. And after listening to y'all's daily update, which was awesome, and thank y'all very much for doing that, by the way, for those of us that can't make it to Hamvention. It was great. It was great listening to it. So, what was y'all's opinion of Xenia? And I hear crickets.
I was muted again. George, go ahead.
Yeah, Xenia was good. At the end of the day, I think it was really good. They put in an enormous amount of effort to put everything together to get to the new venue. I think the new venue is very good. I think things were surprisingly well organized, considering how it could have been really a mess. And there were certainly issues, but I think they did a fine job of managing through that. There's still more things to improve in the future, but overall, I think everybody was pretty happy. And given that such an enormous change is going to inject a lot of problems, I think that it all went well. I liked the venue. I thought it was good. Next year, I think will be better. I'm sure they'll do some facility upgrades beyond what they already did, but it was fairly roomy. You could actually get around in the aisles. The food was like light years better than it used to be, and I think everybody had a good time. Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think, one of a couple of the biggest complaints, traffic, which I know they're aware of and working on. There were some challenges there, and then also the mud. And I remember reading articles that the Hams, we basically destroyed all the soccer fields and whatnot. And there's things they're aware of. The tent situation that's just hopefully something that will not be an issue next year. Because we were supposed to be in the tent, and that was not. We came and found a river of mud when we arrived on Thursday. But fortunately, again, our friends at airspy.us put us up, and that was very good. Overall, the energy was just really, really high. People were in a good mood. People were excited to be there and excited about the new things. It was weird to me because after you've been to Dayton a couple times, you kind of knew where everybody was in Hera. And so that was from a personal complaint's not the right word, but it just, when I wanted to go see a vendor, I had to be like, oh yeah, where are they again? Which building are they in? Which booth are they in? Whereas, I already had a mental map of the old place, but that's also kind of exciting. It was really far exceeded my expectations for how well it went, given it was the first year. And these guys are really committed. The county of Xenia Greene County is really committed. Xenia is really committed, and it can only just skyrocket from here.
I think this year they had about 5,000 more attendees than last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so overall it was a big plus. My concern was they might have gone down just because it's a change, but I think they attracted a bunch of people who wanted to see the new venue or were just sick and tired of the old place and wanted to see something newer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it went pretty well.
And I know y'all were one of the forum people as well, and y'all had the biggest room or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, we had a huge room with several people. I think there was 150 or 200 people or so in the session, which was great.
About 150.
And the only challenge there was they had the air conditioner blower right at the front stage. They didn't set the room right, but I'm sure they'll fix that next year. But aside from that, we had a good turnout, and that was a lot of fun. So we got a good chance to chat with people. And I think next year one of the things we were kicking around is maybe do a Hamradio 360 get-together some evening and just hang out and chat with people and do that, because we do that in the booth, but we're so inundated with people that it's really hard to just hang out and talk. There's so many people there. It's takes all of our time and attention just to say hi to anybody. So I think we're going to try to do some sort of evening event or I don't know what, but something like that.
Well, that would be cool.
So maybe we need to do a podcaster's offsite.
Yeah,
we.
Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
I'm sorry. We talked about that as far as maybe on one of the nights of Hamvention, kind of having a meetup maybe on Saturday night, where a lot of the different ham radio content producers get together and just host all of our audiences together. Because at the end of the day, the most uplifting part about it is we're there to work, and this year we brought some of the Workbench project boards with us to sell, which we had no idea how that would go. And at the end of the day, we're there to meet our listeners. We're there to get to spend time and hear their stories. But we're also there to provide coverage for the thousands of hams who can't be there. This year was, just a really amazing reinforcement of what we're doing is a good thing. And, I can't wait for next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to be able to go up there, and I think it would be so awesome to have, a whole row or something of content providers or something there, because I think Linux and the Ham Shack is there, and y'all are there, and was that W5KUB, I think is his call sign. He's there. There's a whole bunch of content providers that are there, and I would love to be one of those people. And just go and see it, because 20 plus years I've been a ham, and I have yet to be to Hamvention.
Well, we had this conversation with Kale early on, and Kale's like, "There's no way in the world I'm ever going to be able to go to Dayton for about 16 reasons, and there's just no chance." And something happened, and it worked out, and he made it, and I think it really left a huge impression on him. So there's hope.
Oh yeah, there's definitely hope, and like I said, I would love to go, and I think it would be awesome just to have just a hangout one night or something like that with everybody and all the listeners and stuff. So maybe we'll shoot for next year. Maybe.
That'd be awesome, man.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Like Kel says, y'all get together one time a year because y'all are spread out all over the U.S. and y'all get together those one thing, and unfortunately I don't think y'all really have a whole lot of time to hang out with just y'all because you're so busy with everybody else and then producing the daily shows, staying up till 2-3 o'clock in the morning, whatever, doing that and
well, I can say exactly the way a day goes, and this happens Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and a little bit of it on Sunday. Basically, get up, go to the show, be there all day talking to people and doing interviews, go out to dinner, go back to the hotel and edit down the content, and then push it out before you collapse sometime late after midnight, and repeat. We need one of those T-shirts. Those T-shirts that are like "Eat Sleep Contest" or whatever. We need like "Eat Sleep Record and Edit a Podcast."
Eat Sleep Podcast. Yeah, there you go. That'll work. So, did y'all? I know I talked to a couple episodes. I talked to. I don't remember what his name is. The guy that did the Arduino for Hamradio book. He was there, and he mentioned that he basically sold out of all his books like on Saturday morning or something like that. How did y'all do as far as all your project boards and stuff that y'all brought with you?
We did pretty good. We sold all the antenna analyzer boards. We did a power management board that's kind of like a combination power gate and a battery monitor sort of thing, and those all sold out. We sold a lot of the dummy loads and gave away a little power strip board. So, in our case, we're really not there to make a buck selling the boards. I mean, the only reason that we have the boards, in fact, it's a big pain in the neck to do this, to be perfectly honest. But the reason we do it is to get people building stuff. So we wanted to come up with projects that either we designed or friends designed that we think would be generally useful to people and teach them something.
Right.
So we design them, and then we have the boards manufactured, and then we sell the boards, and we probably make a couple of bucks on selling the boards that basically goes into paying for the next batch of boards. So, it's kind of more of a service than anything else. And it's a lot of work, but it's very rewarding when we know, like, Jeremy, how many antenna analyzer boards have we sold in total?
When it was all said and done, we 750.
Wow. That's
which again, we thought we'd make 100 and be taking 65 of them to Dayton with us a year later.
Yeah, and selling them for $-1.
That just goes to show you that the DIY part of Hamradio is not dead, or at least
Absolutely
is being
not.
reborn.
Well, in fact, that was the theme of our talk at Hamvention in the forum. Was there's never been a better time to be a ham if you like to build stuff, and boy, that is so true. And it's very encouraging that there's a lot of people that want to listen to the show, which is generally builder oriented. And there's so many people that want to get the boards. I bet some good percentage of the boards will never get built, but the fact that people want to, they're willing to get it and, stare at it every day and, someday I'll build it, but at least it's on their mind. And some people will dive in and build it, and that's what it's all about.
My understanding is y'all don't have any of those boards anymore, though, correct?
The antenna analyzer boards, I believe, are all gone. The power boards are all gone. The dummy loads and as Jeremy calls it, the Smarty load, which is a dummy load with a Arduino. We still have some of those. We'll replenish the other ones. We're going to do a redesign of the antenna analyzer. That's the royal we. So Barrick KJ6VU, who designed it, is going to do a spin on the design to use some more commonly available components. The power management board was modified, and there's a new version of that. We just haven't gotten around to making a stack of them yet, but that's going to happen in the next few months. So, we'll have more of those boards.
Now, in the Rev 2 of the antenna analyzer, are y'all looking at doing VHF and UHF too?
That's a possibility. We'd have to use a different synthesis chip. The chip that we picked is good to 40 megahertz, so essentially it covers the HF bands, but nothing above that. There are other chips that are fairly common that can go up to about 150 megahertz, and so we could cover 2 meters if we change to a different chip and module. But we'll have to see what's available. I mean, part of the challenge with a project like this is we want to make things useful but not expensive. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to keep the cost down, and sometimes that means we might clip a feature. So if we can get a VHF synthesis chip cheap enough, then we would certainly do that, yeah. That means all new code, of course, so there's a whole other unit of effort that we have to sign somebody like Barrick up to do also, to write firmware for it. And, of course, he makes absolutely nothing on this. It's not like, this is... making him any money, so he just does this out of the kindness of his heart. So, like you could imagine any of these projects, it's a unit of work to design it and write the firmware for it and then document it and then answer people's questions when they don't build it right and all that. So it's really a lot of work. And, we do it because we think it's the right thing to do, but it's not a trivial task, so... We have to really kind of not overdo.
But y'all have a really good listener base too that is knowledgeable and have edited your code and rewrote it, rehacked it, and
yes.
Did a bunch of changes and stuff too. So
yeah, that's right. We've got a fabulous listener base because we really have this spectrum, and we consciously want this. So we want people who are experts in an area because they can help other people out and they can help us out. And we also want people who are intrigued by this but have no idea how it works or how to do it because they want to learn. And that's exactly what we want. We want people all the way from, I'm brand new to this stuff and have no technical background, but I'm interested, all the way to professionals in the space that really know what they're doing and they could help the others. Because, like we talked about before, Hamradio is a very giving hobby, and Elmering is a cornerstone of the hobby. And I think all of us who've been hams for a while have an obligation to Elmer those people who are learning what it's all about. And if we could build a community of people across that spectrum, then that's something that we're very proud of.
Right. So overall, I would say that Hamvention was a great success for not only y'all, but for Hamvention in general. What are your thoughts on next year? On one hand, I think that the attendance was up because it was a new venue and people wanted to see what was changed. Do you think that the attendance will continue to rise next year, or do you think maybe it'll go back to where it was before?
I'm pretty sure they're going to get the same turnout or better. I think that the general response from just about everybody, certainly everybody I talked to, was very positive, and they want to go. And I know a bunch of guys who haven't been before, and they're thinking about going next year. So in my little tiny sample, I would say it's going to be, I'd say it's bigger. What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that. I mean, I know that there are some people who are going to be turned off. But, I mean, there were a lot of people that came back because they were turned off by Hera. So I'm going to be positive. And even if next year is a lower year than the year before it, I think that there will be so many of us excited about the improvements that all of us expect to happen at the fairgrounds, that word of mouth will spread and get people back maybe in the third year. So strong first year, maybe a slight decline in the second year, but then a strong third year.
If nothing else, at least have better food, right?
Way better.
Oh yeah, I cannot underscore how good the food was.
Yeah, I talked to, or I heard one podcast, I don't remember where it was, somebody was talking about the food and stuff that was there, and it was like, it was making my mouth water. I was so hungry when I was listening to it, and it's like, just not right. So are y'all...
Radio and food. Oh.
Yeah.
What the heck?
So are y'all planning on doing another forum next year?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we will. I've done a forum for the last 5 or 6 years on various topics, from microcontrollers to antennas and portable operating, and they actually, the folks from Hamvention reached out to us and asked if we would want to present. So I think that it went well. I'm sure they would like to have us back, so assuming that they would be kind enough to invite us again, we'd absolutely do it again for sure.
Cool. Yeah, and I know y'all had a massive explosion the first time y'all were there, and I'm sure y'all probably have a massive explosion on listeners again this year. So definitely a good thing that y'all did, getting y'all's word out, getting y'all's names out and stuff, and the job that y'all do, like I said before, is just awesome. So, well,
I got to tell you that getting all the interviews is really fun, and it's kind of a game where you really want to get as many as you can and have them be useful. Mm-hmm. I think I got maybe 8 interviews, maybe 9, and but Jeremy, you totally scored, because you went back on Sunday. You were just working the floor. You must have done easily 2 to 3 times more than I did. So how many did you get by the end of the day?
I don't really remember the count. I remember on Friday, there were so many things. So on Friday, I actually did leave the booth early once the crowd started rolling in, and tried to get to places, but everybody was so busy. I mean, because the crowds rushed all the vendors, and we had a lot of people who were interested in talking to us, but they were like, respectfully, please come back later. And either we would go back later and they were still busy, or we didn't have time to go back later. And one of the things you'll notice this year is we didn't really talk to any of the big vendors. Mm-hmm. And we made a conscientious choice to kind of pick some more of the like the project-focused things like Aridin or Satnogs or things like that. We focused spotlighted a couple of new vendors that were smaller and new, and that was exciting. And part of it was just, getting the understanding the op tempo. I mean, I definitely on Friday felt like I was off my game. And when we were at dinner that night, all of us were kind of hanging our heads in, because on Friday, I think we had a total of like 7 or 8 interviews. And so on Saturday, we just made a conscientious effort to double down, get out there and really start talking to people. And then on Sunday, I have the benefit that I only live about an hour away from the fairgrounds. So Kale and George and I had breakfast on Sunday morning before we all went our separate ways. And, afterwards I was like, you know what, I'm going to run back and I'm going to see what I can do. And I'm really glad I did, because I got some of my favorite interviews on Sunday, and things were slowing down. Folks were, people were starting to pack up booths and whatnot. But people were more than friendly or more than willing to talk to us, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you really racked up the number of the interviews. It was awesome. I was really excited to see that many. And by the way, I think it's Saturday too. Is also raining like mad, so it was kind of hard even to get around.
It was, and one of the things that in the morning there were certainly several some cloud bursts, but I think one thing that would actually be interesting is if Hamvention published a passport. And of course, this idea for me comes from what the national parks do, where you can buy the little the national park passport book and get the stamps as you go visit them. But every vendor should have a passport stamp, so you can go and try to get everybody to stamp your book, so you've seen all the vendors.
That might be interesting.
What would your prize be if you got every stamp?
A book with no room for stamps. that and $4 will get you a cup of coffee at any Starbucks.
$5, but who's counting?
Wow. All right, guys. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you all very much for coming on. This has been a very enlightening and very fun evening. And my wife is texting me. It's time to come in. So,
well, I first of all appreciate the opportunity, but what are you doing? We've only been doing this for like an hour. We've got at least another hour and a half to go. I don't know how to do a podcast that doesn't take 4 hours to record that still gets cut down to 2.5 hours.
Just play this one twice.
Yeah, there you go.
You'll have the same experience. Are they still talking? Hey, by the way, Curtis, also we want to say a big congratulations on hitting episode 77, and you're heading for the big 100, and that's awesome. And I know how hard it is to do this stuff when Jeremy and I do it, and we get to split the work. For you to do this yourself is awesome. So I love listening to the show, and thanks so much for doing it. And I know everybody really, really appreciates it. So keep it up.
Thanks. Yeah, I never really thought that I would make it this far. And you know, when I first started recording this a year and a half ago, and I go back and listen to the first couple of episodes, I'm like, really, did I sound that bad? I hope I sound better now, and I hope my listeners enjoy it a whole lot more, and I'm sure they do. But you know, it's that episode 100 is coming up really fast, and I'm hoping to be able to do something special for that. And so make sure y'all stick around for a later episode to find out what that might be.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. You've done a great job cranking things out, and definitely keep it up.
Thanks. All right, guys. Well, I think we will wrap it up there. Again, thank y'all for coming on, and thank you for the kind words. I definitely appreciate it. And thank y'all for what y'all do. Y'all, like I said, y'all have an awesome podcast over there, and talk about some great stuff. Even though some of it's over my head, it gets me looking, like you said, and that's what it's all about. So keep it up as well.
Thanks, Curtis.
Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you very much. You too.
All right, so that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. Thank y'all, George and Jeremy, for coming on today and talking to us about all these different things. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Before we leave, I wanted to mention one thing, especially for all of y'all that are in California. So if you're in California, listen up. I'm sure you probably know about this, but maybe the rest of us don't. I found this on the NO1PC's website, and you may remember him from a few episodes ago, and we talked a little bit about this. He was on the All-Star episode. Anyways, he says that this week, as of like the week of the 4th of July weekend, they got confirmation that the BARA, California Association, or California Amateur Radio Operators, are registered in opposition to AB-1222 in its present form. This is supposed to give us recognition and a brief time to address the California Centra Transportation and Housing Committee at their meeting July the 11th at 1:30 p.m. Given the significant list of those in support versus our lone opposition, this is a pretty daunting moment for 2A and amateur radio. Norm and I knew we could face this dilemma, and our last words before his untimely passing were to stay the course. There is no question but to stand up for the efforts I started, honor Norm's efforts and those of everyone else who have supported us. At the very least, we got some traction and progress in mildly improving CVC 23123.5 into AB-1222. It's been our belief all along that in such a simple, obvious matter, it could be better. This is California. It's what we've been told and what we expect, yes? Addressing this all along, and especially now in the monumental challenge of patience and doing the right thing, I am very pleased and proud and appreciative to all those of support and assistance. This is not a specific call to action, but if your local senator is a minute member of the Senate Transportation Committee, it wouldn't hurt to give their office a call and share some support for us and this process. If you would like to be there with us on Tuesday, these links may help you to live and to live and archive videos, and there is several links in the show notes of today's episode. He continues, in closing, I ask that you reserve a moment of silence to our dear friend Norm Lucas, WB6RVR, who is SK. This effort I dedicate to Norm and his years of leadership and friendship as we served the NARCC board together. And now this. Thank you, Norm, and everyone. Again, that is from the NO1PC's hands-free information site, which you can find a link to in today's show notes. So that pretty much wraps it up. I want to thank all of y'all for listening. Again, you can find the show notes at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/77. I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/everythinghamradio and groups /everythinghamradio, YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio, and on Twitter at K5CLM. If you like what you heard here and you would like to help support this podcast, there are several ways you can do it. You can make a one-time donation. There is a link at the bottom of the show notes. You can do that. You can also go to our support page and find information on it. You can become a per episode contributor through Patreon, and thank you to my Patreons that are already signed up. You can make a $1, $2, $5, $10 donation per episode through Patreon. And last but not least, you can go and shop through my affiliate links, which you can find on the sidebar of any page on my website. For more information on how you can help support this podcast, go to everythinghamradio.com/support for more information. And guys and gals, I guess that pretty much wraps it up. Again, thank you, Jeremy and George, for coming on today, and we will see you next time. This is K5CLM signing out. 73, y'all.